Folks, you know this man, but you might not know this man. So we're going to dig into the story of Jack Selby, figure out what makes him tick, what's got him to this point, and we will do that and much, much more. Jack, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing very, very well. Thank you again for hosting me on the iced coffee hour. I was very, very nervous when I saw it come out. It was probably a 10 of 10 video for you guys. I felt very disappointed, but hey,
It's
we gave it
not.
a shot.
It's not a 10 out of 10. So yeah, the people they really liked you, and I appreciate you coming on.
I appreciate that. Well, one of the things that I wanted to do today, you and I have talked a little bit, you're trying to make some moves, get some deals done. You tried seller financing, you have your line of sight on your next potential house hack. But I just want to step back and really admit to you that I don't know your story, right? I
Mhm.
know a little bit about you from today's interaction, but who is Jack? And tell us who is Jack.
Sure. Who is Jack? I would say a very curious person. So it works out well that I kind of ask questions for a living and fairly ambitious. I'd like to say I'm long-term oriented.
Mm,
Uh, and just a pretty normal guy. That's 25 years old living in Las Vegas, to be honest.
yeah. Well, the story doesn't start there, right? Your journey starts in Southern California. No?
Yeah. I grew up in a city called Ventura. It's I would say like a pretty a small to medium-sized city in Southern California, about an hour north of LA.
Hmm.
Went to college at UCSB, and then somewhere in the mix, I started working with Graham Stephan because I was a huge fan of his content. And then I moved to live with him in Santa Monica. Then we moved to Vegas together. Uh, and that's pretty much it. That now I'm here. We created the
Yeah.
podcast somewhere in the mix.
There you go. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask about was money, right? A
Mhm.
lot of people know Graham's story, right? Started as real estate agent.
Mhm.
He's obviously very, I'll say frugal, right?
Mhm.
The whole, don't buy coffee at Starbucks, make your own. But what is Jack's relationship with money? Are you also conservative, or what's your relationship with money?
It's interesting because I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Growing up, I was never really given money at all. So like I would go out with my friends and I had this thing I'd do called play the waiting game, which is essentially like I couldn't afford to get lunch with them because my parents wouldn't give me money to go out. Like I feel like some kids when they're growing up, sometimes you say, "Hey, I want to go get lunch with my friends," and they'd be like, "Okay, here's $10, here's $20, you can go get lunch."
Right.
Kids would never do that. So I would play the waiting game and I would sit by the table and see if they wouldn't finish their food and I would eat it. And so that led to me being pretty frugal
Yeah,
growing
I would
up.
guess. I would guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I was not allowed to get a job, so I couldn't make my own money too. They wanted me to focus on schooling.
Okay.
So that was a thing. And I think like all of those things put together led to me being pretty frugal. And that's been a habit I've been trying to break recently.
Okay. So, when you think about money, do you have an abundance or scarcity mindset when you think about money?
Honestly, I would say I lean more towards abundance, which is, a funny juxtaposition when compared to Graham's just extreme scarcity mentality.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, we talked a little bit about it in our discussion. Graham is willing to put together an 8.0 earthquake, kids with disabilities, this, that, the other thing, and he's like, that's what I got to plan for, even though it's got
Yeah.
like 0.00001% chances when you do the math. I think it's a much healthier place to be, frankly, as a leaning towards abundance. Being that extreme, uh, mindset is frankly a little bit scary, and obviously keeps him up at night. He thinks a lot about it. Um,
It's not a belief that serves him well now.
no,
Like I think it
no,
was
agreed.
important for a period of time in there.
Oh yeah,
But I think you kind of also have to be somewhat in alignment with reality. And I think that that's a little bit of a delusion. And I'll tell this to him that I think it's a little
yeah,
bit of a delusional belief, and he would potentially even admit so, but he
I
can't
think
help it.
so. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's at this point it's hardwired. It appears. I've had several conversations, even privately at lunch one time with my wife, and it's just he believes it, and it's like, okay, I got it. Um, so I know today you are actually house hacking in Las Vegas.
Mhm.
Um, why don't you talk about that experience? Because I think one of the things that 25-year-olds, folks younger than you, the path to getting wealthy probably starts with house hacking. Real estate's always been hard, but it's wildly hard today. I think house hacking is a potential launching pad for a lot of people. So talk about that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say my house is the best investment I've ever made, aside from like investing in myself and stuff like that. I would say the house is the best investment in terms of ROI. I bought the house 3 years ago when rates were really low, so I got 2.874 on the house, borrowed like 500,000 bucks, bought it for around
Nice.
600,000, put 20% down. Those are just rough numbers.
Sure.
Yeah, I've been able to, I'm probably right now, I don't even do the math to be honest, but I'm probably right about break even. So I'm living for free. And I take, the primary bedroom and I got my own bathroom and walk-in closet. So it's like it's a nice living. It's in a good area. I probably could be profiting a little bit, a couple $100 a month, but it's not the biggest deal for me. And yeah, it's been a great experience. I'm getting solar installed right now. I don't know if you can hear this or if the audience can hear it, but it's very loud for me. But that's going to make me cash flow a few $100 a month.
Right.
Yeah,
And again, you're getting solar installed, obviously, so you can reduce your energy expense, and
correct.
then that falls to the bottom line.
Electricity here in Vegas is very expensive just because of
Yeah.
the air conditioning. Yeah.
Yeah, several months a year, it's running all the time. I
Yeah.
know that experience as well. So this is your first house hack. I know privately, you and I've talked about you're on the hunt for the next one.
Mhm.
Um, the plan is, I understand it, is you're going to take your current living arrangement, the master bedroom, make that another, I'll call it unit or another rental. So this house that you're in right now will cash flow, and then you're going to go buy another one. Is that the plan?
Yeah, the plan is pretty like flexible. Like I am comfortable buying a rental property and just continue living here and then
Okay.
renting out the place. Or if that's only if I find something that fits that need.
Yeah.
It would work out. The math would pencil with that. I would also consider buying a nicer place and then moving in there and then moving in all of my current tenants because the tenants that I have in this house right now, I call them my tenants, but really they're actually my friends. So
Right.
like it's kind of a dicey situation, but they are essentially my friends that rent from me, and I would love to live with them in
Oh,
another
okay.
like upgrade. I wouldn't charge them more in rent. I would just burden that. But yeah, and then I would rent out this property and it would cash flow.
So let me just make sure I understand that. So again, your boys are going to go with you to the next pad if you upgrade. Got it. So the place that you're in right now, clean up, blah blah blah. Does that just become a long-term rental to one family,
Yeah,
or okay, got it.
and it would cash flow. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay, good. All right. So I got that now. So this would become your first long-term rental. You're not going to do room rent by room or anything like that when you leave. Okay, perfect. That makes a lot more sense. Um, you know, you're 25. You're already ahead of the game of lots of folks. Do you look out, 5 or 10 years and kind of create that long-term plan? Are you more of a 1 year at a time guy? How do you how do you kind of hold yourself accountable to keep moving forward?
holding myself accountable to keep moving forward. I would say I do have financial goals in terms of like hit a certain net worth. It's not by a certain age; it's just hitting a certain net worth. So I would say that kind of keeps me going a little bit. I know I want to provide for my eventual family, so I would say that continues pushing me forward. I like to think of where I'll be in 5, 10 years. I don't think it would be Vegas realistically, unless if the podcast continues to demand my presence here. I would probably live in California and have a few $1,000,000 and a few rental properties that are cash flowing, where to the point where I wouldn't need to work if I didn't fully feel like it and I could take time off at lengths if I wanted to. But I think I'm industrious to the point where I will always want to have something going on, to be working on something, just because it kind of gives me a little bit of purpose. And that's probably where I'd like to be in 5 to 10 years. But it's still so flexible. It's kind of pointless, I feel like, generally speaking, to have goals like that. I read Atomic Habits by James Clear, and he said you never rise to the level of your goals, but you fall to the level of your systems, which I think is very, very true. So, like, having these goals and ambitions won't really pull you towards them. It doesn't do much. Sure, it might provide like a general light at the end of the tunnel, but at the same time, the tunnel is full of twists and turns, and you usually don't end up where you'd expect to be, which is
Yeah.
exactly my story for the past 5 years. I would have never guessed that I'd be here right now.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah. One of the things I'm always curious about when I talk to successful people, which I consider you one of them, certainly wildly successful at 25. When you were in school, right? Your parents said, go to school, you can't have a job. Your job's to get a good education.
Yeah.
Did you always feel like it wasn't you, or did you? Because I'm always struggling with, like, are you an employee or are you an entrepreneur?
Mhm.
I think you're one or the other. And again, that's my natural bias. I own that bias and I could be wrong. But when you're in school, going to school, your parents say, hey, you can't work. So you don't have money. You got to play the waiting game. Were you always in the back of your mind like, this is just not who I am? Or maybe you didn't know.
I think I was just honestly really confused. Like I wouldn't say that it was like super clear to me what I was and where I would fit in. I knew I was smart enough to be able to, and you know, I had generally speaking enough confidence that I would be able to provide enough value to the marketplace to be successful. But I would still say like my life has generally just been cyclical between like confusion and clarity, and then confusion and clarity. So it would be hard to say generally speaking. I knew I was going to be successful in some capacity. Yeah, I had to be. Like it was not really like, you know, whether or not I believed in myself, none of that really mattered to me, to be honest, because that's not really going to change anything. It's just like I was just so convinced that I had to be successful in some capacity. I had to be more successful than my parents. I feel like a lot of sons
Yes.
specifically will feel that way towards their parents.
Oh, amen to that.
Yeah.
That goes past generations. Yes, you always want to be more successful than your parents, your father specifically, in my case.
Yeah.
I am curious. Would you call yourself an entrepreneur today? Would you say you're an entrepreneur today?
Um, I would say by definition, yeah, technically speaking. I mean, Graham and I, we split the iced coffee hour equity wise, basically. And it's I run the business. So I do most of the, I would say, the business operations. We have agencies that we pay out. We have a couple people that, like contractors and stuff that we pay out. And it is technically speaking a full-on business. We
Yeah,
have the business checking account. We have our LLC established. So
yeah,
yeah, I would say an entrepreneur.
absolutely. Yeah, I would say that as well. So one of the things that I would love to hear about is, um, you're 25, so that means Gen Z. Do I have that right, or am I off?
Yeah, I'm Gen Z.
Gen Z. So Gen Z, um, I don't know. When you think about your peers, Gen Z, at least by age, obviously not by status or assets or anything. What do you think the average Gen Z doesn't understand about money? Right? You now run in circles with wildly
Yeah.
successful people. Every week you're around somebody else who's wildly successful. What is it that the average 25-year-old Gen Z doesn't understand about money?
That's a great question. I thought about that a lot because, to tell you the truth, I think what might make me a little bit different than other people in my general situation, like maybe, in social media, making a good amount of money, my age group, maybe, male, they a lot of the times only hang out with other influencers and very successful people, which is generally speaking a good thing. But I think sometimes it can make you maybe not super in tune with the average person. And I make a conscious effort, and I just honestly love like all of my hometown friends, my high school buddies. I live in a house with no other person in this house like makes YouTube videos. They're all just kind of like normal, normal guys.
There you go.
Which I would
Okay.
consider myself as well. But I would say like having those connections, I kind of see a little bit of the difference because I spend a good amount of time with like the influencer type, the business entrepreneur type, as well as just like, the W2 people. Um, W2 people. I don't mean that and also like some sort of like a negative connotation. I'm just trying to
No.
distinguish the difference.
Yeah.
I would say what people don't understand is that you need to be intentional about money. And I think
Ooh.
these days people are very, very, very entitled, unfortunately. And I absolutely have been entitled in my life. So I'm not, Mr. Perfect over here, but I think that growing up, we've had more money than we've ever had. And it just makes sense that we would develop in such a way where we feel entitled towards certain things. And they don't want to work for it. They think that they deserve, a coffee at, a nice coffee restaurant, spending like $7 on a coffee if you live in New York because you just put in, you know, let's say an 8-hour shift the day before. So I would
Right.
say it's like the entitlement and not being intentional about it, and the whole your truth versus my truth rather than the truth. It's like
Ooh.
you don't think about what the actual truth of the matter is, which is if you save the $8 on the coffee and you invest it over the long term, you are protecting yourself against everything else. Rather than, I guess, just kind of thinking that you are a product of everything else and you have no control over it. So
I'm
it,
I'm
it's a lot of kind
curious.
of rambling, but I would say that's generally it. Be intentional about money. Think about the money that you save. Think about the money that you invest, and don't just think that you're going to be like essentially in a roller coaster, having no control over where you go. You know what I mean? Like take a little bit of
Oh yeah.
ownership, responsibility for your life.
Yeah, one of my favorite books, it's actually on my website, One Rental at a Time, is Extreme Ownership. I think
Mhm.
even my age group, Gen X, there's so much blaming others. It's, you don't really realize it until you own everything. You're giving power away, right?
Mhm.
If you own it and you're intentional, you can change it. But if you just blame others, how are you going to change any of your circumstances? So I love that, being intentional. I am curious that I love the fact that you kind of play both roles, right? You obviously run in a very high end circle of influencers, but your boys, your high school friends are still on the other side as well. So you get that overlap. Do you think the average Gen Z thinks it's possible to get rich?
Uh, the average no.
Do you think the average Gen Z wants to be an influencer of some type?
Yes, I would say so.
That's an interesting dichotomy.
Yeah. I think generally speaking, people want to be an influencer because it looks very glamorous.
Yep,
I mean, unfortunately, it's kind of a product of being an influencer is you want to make it look glamorous.
of
So
course.
it only makes sense that people would be glamorized by it. And then yeah, people they want to be rich, they want to be an entrepreneur, but I feel like they always have, wanted to be doing well.
Yeah.
It's just how we have like I think more than ever the rose-colored glasses uh about being rich and an influencer and all of that stuff. Whereas back in the day, maybe it was associated a little bit more with hard work, but maybe not anymore.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a connection. I knew we were talking today, so I actually did some reading about Gen Z. I have this percentage. This came from Pew Research Center, so give credit to where credit is due. They said only 32% of young people, and this is Gen Z, young people, have 5 close friends. That is the number one reason for unhappiness. How does that hit you as somebody in Gen Z?
I would say having a very like tumultuous life so far, the one thing that keeps me sane and happy are my relationships. And so I've fortunately had a lot of experience in that, I guess. When I hit my lowest lows, like the people that made it okay were, I guess, the things that made it okay were the people when they came and they supported me through that. And so that's given me a lot of clarity towards that. And honestly, I'm just really blessed to have the friends that I have. And I would say 100% without a doubt, if you do not have good friends, forget money, forget all of this stuff. Don't forget your health. I think your health is very important. So let's stay in shape, everybody.
Yeah, please.
Make some good friends and get close to them because you know happiness. What do they say? Happiness is best when shared.
Yes.
Experiences are best when shared. And they'll also pull you to be a better version of yourself, to make more money, to be more successful, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, absolutely. Relationships come second to health.
No,
Yeah.
I would
Is
agree with that. Yeah.
bottom of the totem pole relative to that.
No, I have a saying that I keep trying to tell people because again, we're trying to help, we're trying to grow the middle class, all that stuff. I keep telling people you got to fire your friends, not all your friends, but some of your friends don't want to grow with you. They're an anchor, they're a negative voice. They want you to stay who you are, and they don't want you to change and grow. And sometimes we do got to grow, we got to mature, we got to become something different. And
But
sometimes
that's the whole part of like taking ownership of where you're at. People think that they just have to do whatever's given to them. Rather than like, okay, I'm going to see this for what it really is, and I'm going to break off this toxic relationship. They just think that they're in the ride of the roller coaster and they can't control their own life, but you really can.
Yeah, folks, read Extreme Ownership. Jocko Willink, I think, is the author, Navy SEAL. But yeah, it's you've got to own your stuff, and that's the biggest thing. Now I'm 52, right? So twice your age. My daughter's 32, so she's older than you. Is you've got to take ownership of who you're around. For Generation X, there was a saying: you're the average of your 5 friends. I still believe that's true. Maybe it's changed with social media. But again, if you want 6 pack abs, get around 5 people with 6 pack abs. You want to be a millionaire, get around millionaires. You want to be a social media influencer, get around those. So, people, I don't comfort. I think that's it. Comfort is addictive, but that's not where growth occurs.
Absolutely. And sometimes the change is more uncomfortable, even if there's a reward on the other side of the change, than it is to just remain with, I guess, whatever you're used to, even if it is mildly uncomfortable.
Yeah, I love all of that. One of the things that I knew I wanted to do, because again, iced coffee hour, now over 1 million subs. Congratulations. You now
Mhm.
have the reach and ability to travel anywhere to interview anyone. You've interviewed some amazing people. The Alex Hormozzi's, Grant Cardone, Peter Schiff, Layla Hormozzi, Cody Sanchez, Michael Saylor, Dave Ramsey, Ben Mala, and so many more. I'm curious, is there a thread of information that you've taken from these folks that other either Gen Z or younger folks or frankly older folks should really witness? Because what I've seen with successful people in different areas is there's just a few things that are tried and true no matter what they're successful in. What have you taken from all these people?
Sure. I would say that there's a common thread, which is like being very selective with their time. But I also think that that's not the most important thing, I suppose, if you're just trying to get out of the rat race. Like, I wouldn't say you should be selective with your time at all. Like, I was not selective at my with my time when I was trying to grow. I emailed Graham several times and I said, "Hey, the one thing I can give you, I have no skill whatsoever, but the one thing I can give you is as much time as you want. Like, tell me to do one thing and I will work tirelessly at learning it, perfecting it, and delivering it. Like, I just want to provide value to you. And the only way I could do that was with my time." So I would say, at different stages through the journey, you need to consider different things. And I think it was actually Hormozy that said this. Um, if you're working a minimum wage job, don't get advice from Bill Gates. That's not really going to help you a whole lot.
Right.
Get advice from someone that's maybe one or two steps ahead of you rather than someone that's 10 steps, because their brain has been completely reformatted to something else. And that honestly will not translate. It's like trying to teach English to a dog. It's just not really going to work.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I would be curious. You obviously had Michael Saylor on here in the last 6 months or so, I believe. Um, Obviously, he's the huge Bitcoin guy, MicroStrategies, all of that. What does Gen Z think about Bitcoin or
I don't
crypto?
think they do. I don't think they like realistically,
Oh,
there's a small percentage of people that actually understand Bitcoin and understand its value. I have a very limited understanding of Bitcoin, but I probably understand more than 99% of Gen Z. I would just say people think that Gen Z understand because they're like younger and it's techie.
yeah.
But realistically, people don't truly understand Bitcoin. Well, I shouldn't say people, but I would say like the average Gen Z person. I think that
Okay.
once again, like we still think of like the Gen Z people on TikTok and social media, and we think that somehow every one of us is like that. But in actuality, very, very, very few are. Um, that's what I would say. I think a lot of people are attracted to Bitcoin. If you, I suppose, divided up different age groups in terms of like where their portfolio allocation is, you might see a concentration of like younger people in Bitcoin. But I think that's just because they think they'll get rich quick,
Mm,
and like their friends are talking about it. But I wouldn't say that that has any correlation to do with like a good understanding of Bitcoin, to be
yeah.
honest.
And one of the things I love about iced coffee hours, you're willing to go on the other side, the opposite side of Michael Saylor, I would call Peter Schiff, right? He's
Mhm.
obviously very much the gold bug.
Yeah.
He's sort of anti-Bitcoin. He jokes and he just had a tweet this morning that, hey, look at Bitcoin's down, gold's up. I'm curious when you talk to Peter Schiff and you have Michael Saylor, conversation before that, how do you internalize all of these, competitive or different views?
The unfortunate reality, and like I said earlier in this conversation, I've had like a cyclical, I guess, experience so far between like clarity and confusion. My understanding so far, I would love to have more clarity and an actual answer, but I think that you never will. I think that, as in terms of stuff like this, it'll be really hard, centuries maybe, before we come to like an objective truth. Because if we truly knew which one was better and which one was worse, I feel like that would, and everyone would know as soon
All
as,
right.
one person knew if we actually had an answer. So it's really hard to internalize it, but I would just say come as close to the truth as you possibly can. And internalizing, I would say all of these like combating ideas you just take it a day at a time.
Yeah.
Like, there's not really, unfortunately, a great answer to that. As soon as I ended the conversation with Peter Schiff, I was like, wow, maybe I should get into gold, you know? And I was very skeptical. And I would say that experience made me a whole lot libertarian than I was beforehand. And that has stuck with me.
There you go.
And Sailor, I would say that's kind of like the fundamental, uh, the foundation upon which their, ideologies are built upon is like a sort of libertarian thing. So I would say
Yes.
that's the common truth that I kind of, grasped from that. But their answers to that are kind of going in different
Right.
directions. So I would say I maybe, to answer your question, I was kind of working through my own thoughts, if you couldn't tell, when I was answering this question. But I would say it's that libertarian foundation.
I like
That's
it.
the closer truth that I got from that. Yeah.
That's a wonderful observation. I think a lot of people, if you were going to go back on the Iced Coffee Hour and watch Michael Saylor and then watch Peter Schiff back to back, I think that'd be a great challenge for folks. Do yourself a favor, go to Iced Coffee Hour, watch Michael Saylor's interview, then Peter Schiff, and let me know in the comments below, Bitcoin or gold or libertarian, as as Jack has kind of highlighted. One of the things that I knew I wanted to ask you about is you had the opportunity to interview Grant Cardone
Mhm.
at least once, if not more than once. And Grant Cardone is obviously the guy in my world that basically poo-poos the single family home, right? You know my story, one rental at a time, very much pro single family home rental. I'm curious when you think about what Grant Cardone is out there saying, and then how we talked about, a month or two ago. How does that play in your mind? Because again, it's competitive, it's different sides of the road.
Interesting question. I would say to all of the gurus out there, whether that's Dave Ramsey, Grant Cardone, Graham Stephan, they all have their own way that they did it that worked out for them. And unfortunately, you can't really say in a dogmatic way that one thing is 100% going to work 100% of the time. Certain things work for certain people. And I guess for like Grant Cardone, I agree with you. This was a big part of our discussion. Was like he says that if you have $300 to your name, spend the last $300 on education. And then I was saying, yeah, but the problem is, 1% of entrepreneurs actually end up making it. So why would you encourage something that has such a low success rate? And he said, essentially, well, some people still make it, and I would argue that it's worth more to invest in yourself than it is in something else. And I said, well, yeah, but the stats show the other way. It was a very, very confusing conversation. I'm not really remembering it perfectly all too well. But I would say, generally speaking, find out what works best for you, test, test, test. And then if you have positive results, continue doing that. All these different people, they all have their different ways that they made it. There's no one size fits all. And I
Yeah,
would just
I
say
think
figure
that
out what works
that
best.
yeah, I think that's wise advice, and myself included, right? You only know it works as it worked for you, and then you try to share your story. I think that's wise advice. Realizing that's where they're coming from, so that's pretty cool. One of the things that I also knew I wanted to talk about is you've interviewed a lot of folks that are very much pro entrepreneur, right? Alex Hormozy, Layla Hormozy, Cody Sanchez,
Mhm.
and one of the things that I've always admitted is that's not my language, right? I'm not comfortable there. I couldn't imagine having to meet payroll and having to build inventory and having to like that's stuff even today gives me the heebie-jeebies.
Mhm.
I am curious, when you look at the audience and I think there's very much, hey, 10% of the world. I think Ed Milet says there's 9% of entrepreneurs and everybody else is an employee. Do you kind of see it that way, or do you think there's some people that kind of blend around, or you could change colors, change sides?
I think you can generally change sides a little bit, but I wouldn't say that every single person can be an entrepreneur. And I wouldn't say that every single person's fit to be a W-2 employee, truthfully. It's interesting. I heard something that I think about quite often, which is like we see physical differences in people, and it's like extremely obvious. You have a super tall person and you have a super short person. You're like, okay, like you're clearly different people. You have a white person, a black person, Asian person. They're clearly all like you can just look at them and they look different, right? Why do we think that it's any different on the inside between
Exactly.
people? Every person is completely different. So I would say, like, in terms of being a W-2 employee or being a business person, some people are just coded differently. And I don't know. I think it's a reasonable conclusion to draw. Like, if you can see actual differences on the exterior, that on the interior as well, just like arbitrarily assigned at birth. Some people are different.
Yeah. Yeah. And the reason I think that's an important part to acknowledge is you got to remember who the sender is, right? The person communicating in the podcast, sending out information, their story. But we as receivers, people consuming the podcast, we may internalize it different. We may hear a thing. And the thing that scares me the most, and this is, these are my words, not yours, like to hear Alex Hormozy and Gary Vee and Cody Sanchez and all these people push small businesses. There are people on the other side that may respect, love, admire them, and they'll just go for it. And it's like, that's not who they are.
Mhm.
And that's just I mean, I've seen so many people blow up, right? I'm 20 years, more than 20 years older than you. And it's like, if you don't know who you are, don't be somebody else, right? They've got decades of learning this, and don't think your year one's going to be like their year 10. It
That's
makes
hard
me,
though, because it's a part of the process of learning who you are, is to
okay.
fail. If you're never combated with any discomfort, how
Ooh,
are you
yeah.
ever going to grow? So I think like, sure, it makes sense to blow up and to fail, but we are so quick to label failing as a bad thing,
Mm,
you know?
growth. Yeah.
So, and a lot of the people that consume that are people between the ages of like, 16 and 25. And I think if there's a time to fail and a time to figure out who you are, it's probably in that age range. So
Amen.
like I said, it's just, it's so boring, but it is the truth that I've arrived to so far, which is you got to figure it out for yourself. Unfortunately, I wouldn't say dogmatically you are the type where you need to be a W-2 employee, get stock options, have a high income, and just invest and save. Don't buy the Starbucks, and you'll be
Mm,
successful and you'll have millions of dollars. I wouldn't be the type of person to say, quit the job, start a business, make the startup. You're the type of person that can take on that risk and you will be successful. It's just hard to
yes.
say.
It's funny. I just had a conversation with Pace Morby a couple of weeks ago, a couple of hours. And the real crux of that conversation was know thyself, which is kind of where this
Mhm.
conversation has gone. Is you got to figure out, know thyself, make mistakes early. Totally agree. 16 to 25 is the perfect time to try, fail, get up, try again, right? Learn, right? There is no failure if you get up and learn. But people really got to know themselves. Is that a fair place to kind of get to?
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's no better way to know yourself than to go through some strife and struggle and, you know, I guess come up against reality. What, there's always a way that I like to think about things, which is like you can live in your own like fairy tale land. That's totally fine. But eventually, even if you're getting successful within this fairy tale land, you will come up against reality. And reality will always win. And are you humble enough to be able to see reality for what it is and to be flexible enough, egoically speaking, to transform your beliefs, to be a little bit more in alignment with reality? Someone said, like, how good of a grasp on reality you have can only be measured by how well you can predict the outcome of a certain decision, experience, or choice, and how accurately, I guess, your prediction is. And if you can continue to do that over and over and over again, you have an accurate grasp on reality, how the market will respond to your skills, how the economy works, how relationships work. If you go and you confront your girlfriend about something that, hey, you think in your brain, I think if I mention this or if I say this in this way to my girlfriend, she will be very receptive of it. If she actually is, you have a good, accurate grasp on relationships, on reality, and you can test this over and over and over again. And if you're constantly surprised by the outcomes of your decisions, then you probably have a bad grasp on reality, and you should reconsider the way that you think things.
Oh, I love that. It's great advice. Folks, you might want to rewind that, listen to that again, because that's gold right there. I got two kind of final questions before we wrap up. Number one, I always want to ask you, you've interviewed a who's who of luminaries and gurus and famous folks on the Iced Coffee Hour. Why don't you name a couple, two or three interviews that have stuck with you all this time? Whether you call them your favorites or your most impactful, whatever you want to say. What were two or three that really Jack Selby felt?
I mean, it's hard to compare anything to like the first couple of times that I was fangirling. So like this is kind of, I guess it's not a very productive answer, but I would say this guy Loft. Like I grew up watching his YouTube videos and he was like one of the first people we had on the show and I was freaking out because I got to meet him. So that was very surreal.
Awesome.
But there's nothing really to take away from that, aside from maybe the fact that, there's novelty and novelty is like
Yeah.
super exciting.
Yeah.
But I would say aside from that, our first one with Alex Hormozy was incredible because he went on this, I guess, this explanation of like belief statements and how you should stay away from them, and rather just like, I guess real statements, because belief statements are an abstraction of the truth. It's a subjective experience of the truth rather than the actual truth. It's your fairy tale land coming up against reality. And you should just speak just in terms of real statements. That's me kind of just, I guess, my explanation. It's an abstraction of what he was saying.
Sure.
But I thought that was really interesting. And then another one, I would say like another interview would be our second Dr. K one. I was going through a little bit of something personally for a few years, and that was a really weird one because this is the first time I've mentioned this, I guess, somewhat publicly, but like I kind of choked up a little bit on that podcast, oddly enough, just because I guess right time to have a certain conversation, which was like growing up with like undiagnosed ADHD was, if anyone has had that happen to them, it's kind of a difficult experience. And I guess I had some like revelation sometime throughout that podcast. And it was weird because I'm not the type of guy to ever get emotional. That's just not me.
Right.
But I kind of choked up a little bit, cut the entire segment out, was way too uncomfortable with posting that.
Not putting that out there.
Yeah, we're not putting that out there. But I would say that one was pretty transformational.
Wow. That's awesome. Yeah. That's awesome. Very, very cool. The other thing I knew I wanted to ask you again, you probably can get nearly any interview or guest you want at this point, certainly because you have the ability to travel to them, which certainly makes it easier. But do you have a dream list, you and Graham, 2 or 3 folks that's still on the board that you've yet to connect with?
Yeah, Joe Rogan, Lex Friedman, and Elon Musk would all be incredible. For selfish reasons, Rex Orange County is my favorite musician. So I think it would do incredibly well? Maybe once it hit the algorithm and it went to his super fans, but it would not hit with our audience. But I would love to have him on the show. And yeah, I would say those are I would, this sounds kind of interesting, but I would love to have Kamala Harris on the show. I would love to do that. Genuinely would love. I would like having Trump on the show would be cool, but I know what he would say
right
when I challenged him on certain things. Like I can already predict that. But Kamala Harris, I have
no idea.
No idea. So like for me, that would be fascinating,
Yeah.
I would probably rather beat Trump for selfish reasons, but Kamala Harris, I would love to ask her questions.
A lot of people would love to ask her questions. Not a lot of people get to. I think she's hiding in the basement a lot, but there you go. Well, this has been a lot of fun for me. I appreciate you saying yes to this. I know how busy you are. If somebody wanted to reach out, follow you, where do you want to send them? Just send them to Iced Coffee Hour. Does Jack Selby have a spot? Where do you want to send people?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to see the show, Iced Coffee Hour on YouTube, if you want to check out my Instagram or like message me or anything, JLSSELBY on Instagram. I will also, I like to, if I ever go on someone's show, I like to leave like a little parting message. And the main thing is stay in shape. That's very important. Do not get obese. That is not a good thing. We're kind of in a situation now where people think that it's like okay to be whatever you want, but I think generally speaking, you should always try to be fit. It's hard to have a clear mind when you don't take care and respect your body. So I would say get fit, have great friends, have people that are close to you. And finally, if you do want to take the risk and be successful entrepreneur style, the best way of doing that worked for me, works for most people, if you're a hardworking person, is find a mentor. That can never be stressed enough. If you want to be successful, that's the way to do it. I guarantee you, if you work hard and find a good mentor, you would be successful. You will be successful. So,
folks,
absolutely.
That is Jack Selby, one of a kind. Thank you, my friend. Take care.
Thank you.